Hello Fanatics, welcome to Diamond Painting Fanatics. I am Cindy and I am here with a true crime episode. I do apologise, it's been so long, but I'm hoping to get on top of things again now and get back to my true crime. You guys seem to enjoy them. So feel free to grab whatever you're working on, come join me. I am working on my pink project, as you can see, and getting there. Slowly but surely we're getting there. So today I want to talk about the murder of James Bulger. And it's a very tragic story. James is a 2-year-old boy from Kirkby in Merseyside who was abducted, tortured and killed by two 10-year-old boys, Robert Thompson and John Venables, on Friday the 12th of February in 1993. This was 28 years ago to the day. We're going to get straight on to the murder, and it is a little graphic in places, really is. Okay, so I'm just going to dive straight in, so make sure you have a project to work on and you have a drink and everything you need. CCTV evidence from the New Strand shopping centre was taken on Friday the 12th of February 1993. It showed Thompson and Venables casually observing children, apparently selecting a target. The boys were playing truant from school, which they did regularly. Throughout the day, Thompson and Venables were seen stealing various items, including sweets, a troll doll, some batteries and a can of blue paint, some of which were later found at the murder scene. One of the boys later revealed that they were planning to find a child to abduct, lead him to the busy road alongside the shopping centre and push him into oncoming traffic. That alone is horrific. That same afternoon, James went with his mother Denise to the New Strand shopping centre. Whilst inside, they were at a butcher shop on the lower floor of the centre at around 3:40. Excuse me. Denise, who had been temporarily distracted, realised that her son had disappeared. Thompson and Venables approached James, took him by the hand and led him out of the shopping centre. The moment was caught on CCTV at 3:42 p.m. And I mean, we all do it. You know, we all take our eyes off our kids, whether we're grabbing something from the shelf or speaking to the till person. I mean, within minutes, these boys have literally grabbed this kid. James was taken to the Leeds and Liverpool Canal around 1/4 mile from the New Strand shopping centre, where he was dropped on his head and suffered injuries to his face. The boys joked about pushing James into the canal. An eyewitness during the trial said that when they saw James at the canal, he was crying his eyes out. During a 2.5 mile walk across Liverpool, the boys were seen by 38 people, but most bystanders did nothing to intervene. 2 people challenged Thompson and Venables when they claimed that James was their younger brother or that he was lost, and they were taking him to the local police station. At one point, the boys took James into a pet shop from which they were ejected. Eventually, the boys arrived in the village of Walton, and with Walton Lane Police Station across the road facing them, they hesitated and led James up a steep bank to a railway line near the disused Walton and Anfield railway station, close to Anfield Cemetery, where they began torturing him. One of the boys threw blue Hembrol modelling paint, which they had shoplifted earlier, into James's left eye. They kicked him, stamped on him, threw bricks and stones at him. Batteries were placed in James's mouth, and according to police, some batteries may have been inserted elsewhere, although none were found. Finally, the boys dropped a 10-kilogram, which is a 22-pound iron bar, described in court as a railway fish plate, on James. He sustained 10 skull fractures as a result of the bar striking his head. Alan Williams, the case pathologist, stated that James suffered so many injuries, 42 in total, that none could be isolated as the fatal blow. Thompson and Venables laid James across the railway tracks and weighed him down with rubble in the hope that a train would hit him and make his death appear an accident. After they left the scene, his body was cut in cut in half by a train. James's severed body was discovered 2 days later on the 14th of February. A forensic pathologist testified that he had died before he was struck by the train. Police suspected that there was a sexual element to the crime, since James's shoes, socks and trousers and underpants had been removed. The pathologist's report, which was read out in court, found that James's foreskin had been forcibly pulled back. When Thompson and Venables were questioned about this aspect of the attack by detectives and a child psychiatrist, Eileen Vizard, the pair were reluctant to give details and also denied inserting some of the batteries. At his eventual parole, Venables' psychiatrist Susan Bailey reported that, quote, visiting and revisiting the issue with John as a child and now as an adolescent, he gave no account of any sexual element to the offence. But we will revisit this later. The police quickly found low-resolution video images of James's abduction from the New Strand shopping centre by 2 unidentified boys. The railway embankment upon which his body had been discovered was adorned with hundreds of bunches of flowers. The family of one boy who was detained for questioning but subsequently released had to flee the city due to threats by vigilantes. The breakthrough came when a woman, on seeing slightly enhanced images of the 2 boys on national television, recognised Venables, whom she knew had played truant with Thompson that day. She contacted the police and the boys were arrested. The fact that the suspects were so young came as a shock to investigating officers headed by Detective Superintendent Albert Kirby of Merseyside Police. Early press reports and police statements had referred to James being seen with 2 youths, suggesting that the killers were teenagers. The ages of the boys being difficult to ascertain from the images captured on CCTV. Forensic tests confirmed that both boys had the same blue paint on their clothing as found on James's body. Both had blood on their shoes. The blood on Thompson's shoe was matched to James through DNA tests. A pattern of bruising on James's right cheek matched the feature of an upper part of a shoe worn by Thompson. A paint mark in the toe cap of one of Venables' shoes indicated he must have used some force when he kicked James. Thompson is said to have asked the police whether the 2-year-old had been taken to hospital to, quote, get him alive again. The boys were each charged with the murder of James Bulger on the 20th of February 1993 and appeared at South Sefton Youth Court on the 22nd of February 1993, where they were remanded in custody to await trial. In the aftermath of their arrest, throughout the media of their trial, the boys were referred to as Child A, which was Thompson, and Child B, which was Venables. Awaiting trial, they were held in a secure unit where they would eventually be sentenced to be detained indefinitely. Up to 500 protesters gathered at South Sefton Magistrates Court during the boys' initial court appearances. The parents of the accused were moved to different parts of the country and assumed new identities following death threats from vigilantes. The trial opened at Preston Crown Court on the 1st of November 1993. Conducted as an adult trial with the accused in the dock, away from their parents, the judge and court officials, the boys denied charges of murder, abduction and attempted abduction. The attempted abduction charge related to an incident at the New Strand shopping centre earlier on the 12th of February 1993, the day of James's death. Thompson and Venables had attempted to lead away another 2-year-old boy, but had been prevented by the boy's mother. Each boy sat in view of the court on raised chairs so they could see out of the dock designed for adults. Accompanied by 2 social workers, although they were separated from their parents, they were within touching distance when their families attended the trial. News stories reported the demeanour of the defendants. These aspects were later criticised by the European Court of Human Rights, which in 1999 ruled that they had not received a fair trial by being tried in public in an adult court. At the trial, the lead prosecution counsel successfully rebuted the principle which presumes that young children cannot be held legally responsible for their actions. Thompson and Venables were considered by the court to be capable of mischievous discretion, meaning an ability to act with criminal intent, as they were mature enough to understand that they were doing something seriously wrong. A child psychiatrist, Eileen Vizard, who interviewed Thompson before the trial, was asked in court whether he would know the difference between right and wrong, and it was wrong to take a child away from his mother, and it was wrong to cause injury to a child. She replied, quote, "If the issue is on the balance of probabilities, I think I can answer with certainty." End quote. She also said that Thompson was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder after the attack on James. Susan Bailey, the Home Office forensic psychiatrist who interviewed Venables, said unequivocally that he knew the difference between right and wrong. Thompson and Venables did not speak during the trial, and the case against them was based to a large extent on the more than 20 hours of tape recorded police interviews with the boys, which were played back in court. Thompson was considered to have taken the leading role in the abduction process, though it was Venables who had apparently initiated the idea of taking James to the railway line. Venables later described how James seemed to like him, holding his hand and allowing him to pick him up on the meandering journey to the scene of his murder. Lawrence Lee, who was the solicitor of Venables during the trial, later said that Thompson was one of the most frightening children he had seen and compared him to the Pied Piper. After his appearances in court, Venables would strip off his clothes, saying, "I can smell James like a baby smell." The prosecution admitted a number of exhibits during the trial, including a box of 27 bricks, a blood-stained stone, James's underpants, and the rusty iron bar described as a railway fish plate. The pathologist spent 33 minutes outlining the injuries sustained by James. Many of those to his legs had been inflicted after he was stripped from the waist down. Brain damage was extensive and included a hemorrhage. The boys, by then aged 11, were found guilty of James's murder at the Preston Court on November the 24th, 1993, becoming the youngest convicted murderers of the 20th century. The judge, Mr. Justice Morland, told Thompson and Venables they had committed a crime of unparalleled evil and barbarity. "In my judgment, your conduct was both cunning and very wicked." He sentenced them to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, with a recommendation that they should be kept in custody for very, very many years to come, recommending a minimum term of 8 years. That's not a very, very many years to come, in my opinion. At the close of the trial, the judge lifted reporting restrictions and allowed the names of the killers to be released, saying, quote, "I did this because the public interest overrode the interest of the defendants. There was a need for an informed public debate on crimes committed by young children." Sir David Omand later criticised this decision and outlined the difficulties created by its 2010 review of the probation services handling the case. Shortly after the trial, and after the judge had recommended a minimum sentence of 8 years, Lord Taylor of Gosforth, the Lord Chief Justice, recommended that the two boys should serve a minimum of 10 years, which would have made them eligible for release in February 2003 at the age of 20. The editors of the Sun newspaper handed a petition bearing nearly 280,000 signatures to the Home Secretary Michael Howard in a bid to increase the time spent by both boys in custody. This campaign was successful, and in July 1994, Michael Howard announced that the boys would be kept in custody for a minimum of 15 years, meaning that they would not be considered for release until February 2008, by which time they would be 25 years old. Lord Donaldson criticised Michael Howard's intervention, describing the increased tariff as, quote, "institutionalised vengeance by a politician playing to the gallery." The increased minimum term was overturned in 1997 by the House of Lords, that ruled it unlawful for the Home Secretary to decide on a minimum sentence for young offenders. The High Court and European Court of Human Rights have since ruled that although the Parliament may set minimum and maximum terms for individual categories of crime, it is the responsibility of the trial judge, with the benefit of all the evidence and argument from both prosecution and defence counsel, to determine the minimum term in an individual criminal case. Tony Blair, who was then Shadow Home Secretary, gave a speech in Wellingborough, during which he said, quote, We hear of crimes so horrific they provoke anger and disbelief in equal proportions. These are the ugly manifestations of a society that is becoming unworthy of that name. Prime Minister John Major said that, quote, society needs to condemn a little more and understand a little less. The trial judge, Mr. Justice Morland, stated that exposure to violent videos might have encouraged the actions of Thompson and Venables, but this was disputed by David McLean, the Minister of State at the Home Office at the time, who pointed out that police had found no evidence with linking the case with, quote, video nasties. They did try to pin it on Child's Play 3, I remember that. But they watched over 200 titles that the Venables family had rented, and they could not pin. There was not one scene, one dialogue or a plot that went, yes, that's where they got the idea from. It was all ruled out. I mean, that's a lot of police work, isn't it? But after the trial, Thompson was held at the Barton Moss Secure Care Centre in Manchester. Venables was detained in Vardy House, a small 8-bedded unit at Red Bank Secure Unit in St Helens on Merseyside. These locations were not publicly known until the boys' release. Details of the boys' lives were recorded twice daily on running sheets and signed by the member of staff who had written them. The records were stored at the units and copied to officials in Whitehall. The boys were taught to conceal their real names and the crime they had committed, which resulted in their being in the units. Venables' parents regularly visited their son at Red Bank, just as Thompson's mother did, every 3 days at Barton Moss. The boys received an education and rehabilitation. Despite initial problems, Venables was said to have eventually made good progress at Red Bank, resulting in him being kept there for the full 8 years, despite the facility only being a short stay remand unit. Both boys, however, were reported to suffer post-traumatic stress disorder, and Venables in particular told of experiencing nightmares and flashbacks of the murder. In 1999, lawyers for Thompson and Venables appealed to the European Court of Human Rights that the boys' trial had not been impartial, since they were too young to follow proceedings and understand an adult court. The European Court dismissed their claim that the trial was inhumane and degrading in treatment, but upheld their claim that they were denied a fair hearing by the nature of the court proceedings. The European Court also held that Michael Howard's intervention had led to a, quote, highly charged atmosphere, which resulted in an unfair judgment. On the 15th of March 1999, the court in Strasbourg ruled by 14 votes to 5 that there had been a violation of Article 6 in the European Convention of Human Rights regarding the fairness of the trial of Thompson and Venables, stating, quote, the public trial process in an adult court must be regarded in the case of an 11-year-old child as a severely intimidating procedure. In September 1999, James's parents appealed to the European Court of Human Rights but failed to persuade the court that a victim of a crime has the right to be involved in determining the sentence of the perpetrator. The European Court case led to the new Lord Chief Justice, Lord Wolfe, reviewing the minimum sentence. In October 2000, he recommended the tariff be reduced from 10 years to 8 years, adding that young offender institutions were a corrosive atmosphere for juveniles. In June 2001, after a 6-month review, the parole board ruled the boys were no longer a threat to public safety and could be released as their minimum tariff had expired in February of that year. The Home Secretary David Blunkett approved the decision and they were released a few weeks later on lifelong licence after serving 8 years. Both men were given new identities and moved to a secret location under a witness protection style program. This was supported by the fabrication of passports, national insurance numbers, qualification certificates and medical records. Blunkett added his own conditions to their licence and insisted on being sent daily update on the men's actions. The terms of their release included the following. They were not allowed to contact each other or James's family. They were prohibited from visiting Merseyside. Curfews may be imposed on them and they must report to probation officers. If they breached the rules or were deemed a risk to the public, they would be returned to prison. An injunction was imposed on the media after the trial, preventing the publication of details about Thompson and Venables. The worldwide injunction was kept in force following their release on parole, so their new identities and locations could not be published. Blunkett stated in 2001 the injunction was granted because there was a real and strong possibility that their lives would be at risk if their identities became known. In the months after the trial and following the birth of their second son, the marriage of James's parents, Ralph and Denise, broke down. They divorced in 1995. Denise married Stuart Fergus and they have 2 sons together. Ralph also remarried and has 3 daughters by his second wife. The Observer revealed that both Venables and Thompson had passed A-levels during their sentences. The paper also told how the Bulger family lawyers had consulted psychiatric experts in order to present the parole panel with a report which suggested that Thompson is an undiagnosed psychopath, citing his lack of remorse during his trial and arrest. The report was ultimately dismissed. However, his lack of remorse at the time, in stark contrast to Venables, led to considerable scrutiny from the parole panel. Upon release, both Thompson and Venables had lost all trace of their Liverpool accents. In a psychiatric report prepared in 2000 before Venables' release, he was described as posing as trivial risk to the public and unlikely to reoffend. The chances of his successful rehabilitation were described as very high. The Manchester Evening News published details that suggested the names of the secure institutions in which the pair were housed in breach of the injunction against publicity, which had been renewed but in early 2001. In December of that year, the paper was fined £30,000 for contempt of court and ordered to pay costs of £120,000. No significant publication or vigilante action against Thompson or Venables has occurred. Despite this, James's mother, Denise, told how in 2004 she received a tip-off from an anonymous source that helped her locate Thompson. Upon seeing him, she was, quote, paralysed with hatred and was unable to confront him. I don't think I could either. In April 2007, documents released under the Freedom of Information Act confirmed that the Home Office had spent £13,000 on an injunction to prevent a foreign magazine from revealing the new identities of Thompson and Venables. On the 14th of March 2008, an appeal to set up a Red Balloon Learner Centre in Merseyside in memory of James Bulger was launched by Denise Fergus, his mum, and Esther Ranson. A memorial garden in James's memory was created at Sacred Heart Primary School in his hometown, the school he would have been expected to attend. In March 2010, a call was made by England's Children's Commissioner Maggie Atkinson to raise the age of criminal responsibility from 10 to 12. She said that the killers of James Bulger should have undergone programs to help turn their lives around rather than being prosecuted. The Ministry of Justice rejected the call, saying that children over the age of 10 know the difference between bad behaviour and serious wrongdoing. In April 2010, a 19-year-old man from the Isle of Man was given a 3-month suspended prison sentence for falsely claiming in a Facebook message that one of his former colleagues was Robert Thompson. In passing sentence, Deputy High Bailiff Alistair Montgomery said that the teenager had put that person at significant risk of harm, serious harm, by making the allegation. In 2012, a 26-year-old man from Chorley, Lancashire, was arrested after allegedly setting up a Facebook group with the title "What Happened to Jamie Bulger Was Effing Hilarious." What is wrong with people? The man's computer was seized for further investigations. On the 25th of February 2013, the Attorney General's Office announced that it was instituting contempt of court proceedings against several people who had allegedly published photographs online showing Thompson or Venables as adults. A spokesperson commented, "There are many different images circulating online claiming to be of Venables or Thompson. Potentially innocent individuals may be wrongly identified as being one of the two men and placed in danger. The order and its enforcement is therefore intended to protect not only Venables and Thompson, but also those members of the public who have been incorrectly identified as being one of the two men." On the 26th of April 2013, 2 men received suspended jail sentences of 9 months after admitting to contempt of court by publishing photographs which they claimed to be of Venables and Thompson on Facebook and Twitter. The posts were seen by 24,000 people. According to BBC legal correspondent Clive Coleman, the purpose of the prosecution was to ensure the public was aware that internet users were also subject to the law of contempt. On the 27th of November 2013, a man from Liverpool received a 14-month suspended prison sentence for posting images on Twitter claiming to show Venables. 14th of July 2016, a woman from Margate in Kent was jailed for 3 years after sending Twitter messages to James's mother, in which he posed as one of his killers and his ghost. The sentence was reduced to 2.5 years on appeal. I mean, why? On the 25th of October, the poor woman hasn't gone through enough. I'm getting annoyed. On the 25th of October 2016, a man was jailed for 26 weeks for stalking Denise. He had previously received a police warning for stalking her in 2008. On the 31st of January 2019, a man and a woman pleaded guilty to contempt of court offences at the High Court after they admitted posting photographs on social media that they claimed identified Venables. Both received suspended prison sentences. 13th of March 2019, actress Tina Malone was given an 8-month suspended sentence an 8-month suspended prison sentence for posting Venables' identity on Facebook. I mean, wow. Now, there's more to this article, and it talks about the later life of John Venables. And shortly before his 2001 release, when he was 17, Venables was alleged to have had sex with a woman who worked at the Red Bank Secure Unit where he was held. In April 2011, these articles came out by David James Smith, who had been following the Bulger case since the 1993 trial. And again later in a BBC documentary titled John Venables, What Went Wrong. The female staff member was accused of sexual misconduct and suspended, and she never returned to work. So, yeah, he's also been in relationships with younger girlfriends, and they kind of defend that as a delayed adolescence. He began drinking and taking drugs and downloading child pornography, and he was visiting Merseyside, which was a breach of his licence, so he was put back in jail. He's been in and out of jail ever since, and this was the one that was not going to be, he was, I can't remember how they worded it now. He was regarded as not a risk to public and very high on the rehabilitation list. We've never heard of Robert Thompson, so I don't know if he is quietly a psychopath. It doesn't appear so, according to these articles. It only talks about John Venables, who's in and out of prison. This bit did make me laugh because it said potential overseas resettlement. In late June 2019, it was reported that British officials had considered resettling Venables in either Canada, Australia or New Zealand due to the high costs behind protecting his anonymity. British authorities had reportedly spent £65,000 in legal fees to keep Venables' identity a secret. In response to media coverage, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern remarked that Venables would need an exemption under the Immigration Act and that he should not bother applying. I mean, even she doesn't want him, so that tickled me. But yeah, this is very, very tragic. And now for my opinions, because when you see these boys, you think, oh my God, they're younger than my youngest son. And part of your heart goes out to them, and 8 years is a long time for a 10-year-old. But when you go back and you revisit this case as I have, and you see the extent of brutality, this is not a normal, neither one of them is a normal 10-year-old. And this annoys me for several reasons, because they took the life of a tiny little 2-year-old boy who was out with his mum, probably getting their dinner, and this happened. And then you're reading, as I'm reading the article, I'm getting annoyed because yes, they're very, very young. They can't go to prison. I mean, that's ludicrous. They can't. But they've gone to these secure units. They're not allowed to give their real name. They're not allowed to say why they're there. So they're already being protected. Then they're getting visits from their mum every 3 days. What form of punishment have they had, in my opinion? And they're arguing about, yes, you should up it from 8 years to 10 years and 10 years to 15 years. It's a very tragic case, and it's made more difficult because the boys were so young when they did this. But the brutality of it is what gets me with this case, and the fact that John Venables has been in and out of prison ever since. You just need to throw away the key now. At this point, there's no hope for him, is there really? I hope that Robert Thompson has turned his life around, and he will also live with what he did and the actions of that day. And of course, my heart completely and utterly goes out to Denise and Ralph. Not only was their child murdered, but in such a horrific, heinous, awful, disgusting manner that little boy, all because she was paying for the meat in the butcher shop, or, got distracted for a few seconds. It's so very, very tragic. So now I have said my piece. There is probably more that I want to say, but I shall leave it there. I think you understand where I stand on this. It's just so very, very, very sad. And I was telling my son that episode very, very soon. I am going to do more of these. So, rest in peace, Jamie. Yeah. I shall see you very, very soon, guys. Thank you for joining me, and I shall see you in another episode very soon. Bye.